Welcome everyone to our CATF meeting presentation where we're going to be reviewing the draft climate action plan, which you received about a week ago. My name is Naomi Devine. I'm the project lead with SSG, or Sustainability Solutions Group. Really happy to see you all again. And I believe, Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the 21st meeting of the CATF.
I think it's just the 11th, but it may feel like the 21st.
Okay, there we go. So the 11th meeting of the CATF. So welcome back, everyone. And Chris, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all again. I'm Chris Trashik. I've been on this project since the beginning. I recognize all of you, and I've been the technical kind of lead on the modeling side of things. So yeah, looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. And just in the realm of still continuing to get to know each other, Ellen, did you want to introduce yourself? And then we'll turn to members of the CATF to quickly introduce themselves and what brought them to the team originally.
Sure. Ellen Roglin, Community Relations Specialist for the Department of Transportation and Development in the county. And I'm pleased to have been involved with this project from the beginning and so excited that we're getting close to the point of having a report to share with the public and then with the board. And thank you all for your patience. It's been a long couple of years with a lot of unexpected events. I guess that's part of what climate change is all about, but really appreciate your sticking with us and looking forward to today's conversation.
Fantastic. And Dr. Present, are you with us?
I am. I'm right here. Thank you. I'm Dr. Sarah Present. I am the Public Health Officer for Clackamas County Public Health. I'm also a family doc at the Beaver Creek Health Centers. I also have been with this project from the very beginning, as we have a lot of interest in the intersection between the changing climate and the health of the public, both as a division and me personally. And I've been involved in sort of the leadership steering committee type level. So I'm excited to have this meeting and have you see the results of all the work we've done.
Fantastic, welcome. And Ellen, is there anyone else from the county team?
Yes, Alex Mim has joined us today from our sustainability office. Alex, would you like to chime in and give us your life story?
Okay, my name is Alex. I'm with Leo. No, my name is Alex Mim. I'm with, hold on, my Siri just decided to chime in here. I'm Alex Mim. I'm on the sustainability and solid waste team at the county. I primarily work with the business community. So my role in the climate action plan has really been kind of in some one-off support roles here and there, but just want to echo again, deep appreciation to all of you for your valuable input. I know myself how much time it takes, and those volunteer roles are very valuable. And I imagine that all of you are, well, I have a sense of where you're feeling you all are right now with this project, but it's at an exciting point. So thank you all.
And good to meet you, Alex. My birthday was on Friday, so I think that makes me an Aquarius, just since we're all getting to know each other. Yeah. Welcome to Aquarius season. Fantastic. All right, let's go to the members of the CATF. Lisa, and then we'll go to William.
Hi, I'm Lisa Kilders with Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District, and I guess I've been with this through the whole thing. And just, we're working with landowners and farmers on climate change, things to survive and adapt. And so this is how I'm involved.
Wonderful. Welcome. Good to have you here. William, and then we'll go to Dave.
Yeah. Bill Street. I'm on the County Timber Advisory Task Force. I headed a delegation to a small climate conference in Paris a few years back, and have retired from sustainable forestry.
Welcome. Good to have you. Dave, and then we'll go to Jenny.
Hi, I'm Dave Bugney, small woodland owner out here in Estacada. I've been here since the beginning and focusing more on the natural and working lands aspects. Thanks.
Jenny, and then Bill.
I'm Jenny Davies. I'm the Public and Environmental Health Director for a national nonprofit, but work remote here from Oregon. I'm also an environmental attorney and just really interested in seeing some quantitative targets so we can get this plan moving forward. Thank you.
Great, welcome. Bill, then Julia.
Hi, I'm Bill Avison, property owner in Clackamas County. I also sit on the ODOT Region 1 Act for Clackamas County. And I think I've been here since day one when everything started. Thank you.
Good to have you still here. Julia, then Valerie.
Hi, Julia Person, Sustainability Manager at Bob's Red Mill. Yeah, being a local manufacturer and employee-owned company, just really important for us to be involved in this process.
Wonderful, welcome. Valerie, then Kim.
Hi, Valerie Pratt. I'm here representing Clackamas County Coordinating Committee. I'm also Tualatin City Council President, and it's kind of exciting because we're concurrently working on our climate action plan here in the city. And I was going to say something else and lost it, so that's it.
Wonderful, thanks. Thanks for coming today. Kim, then Adam.
Hi, my name is Kim Swan. I'm the Water Resource Manager for the Clackamas River Water Providers. So I work for all of the cities, 10 of them, and water districts that get their drinking water out of the Clackamas River from Estacada to Tigard.
Wonderful, great, welcome. Adam, then Jeff.
Hi, I am Adam Rack. I'm with Cooper's Hall, Cooper's Hall Winery. We're tied with Alex Ollie Vineyard down in Malala. We've got a tap room up in Portland. Also a fun place to announce, I am working on a statewide refillable bottle system called Ravino. You'll hear from us soon. We're going to be working with OBRC, who is based in Clackamas as well. So,
Wonderful, welcome. Jeff, then Edgar.
Hi, Jeff Rubin. I live in Wilsonville. I'm a semi-retired emergency manager from a large fire district, recovering geologist. So, from a geological perspective, this process has gone by not even a blink of an eye. I also chair the county's Emergency Preparedness Council.
Wonderful, welcome. And thanks for the geological perspective. Appreciate that too, as well.
From a human perspective, well, we won't get into that.
Edgar, then Julie.
Hi, Ed Wales, live in Canby, former energy advisor with Energy Trust of Oregon, with a focus on commercial buildings, primarily supporting government agencies, jurisdictions, and worked extensively with Clackamas County in that work when I was at Energy Trust.
Wonderful. Thanks for coming today. Julie, then Dan.
Julie Hernandez, Local Government Affairs for Portland General Electric. Thank you.
Thanks for coming today. And Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Hoff. I'm a principal of Harper Hoff Peterson Regalis and a civil and environmental engineer. Also a resident of Happy Valley and own some property as well up in Brightwood Government Camp.
Wonderful. Thanks for coming. Thanks very much, everyone. Just before we get into the agenda, I was going to say I'll be coming down to Clackamas County in March for the plan. And so if you've got favorites places or the best of Clackamas County that you think I should experience, please feel free to let me know in the chat. I'll be happy to collect those ideas as well. So let's get started. Chris, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, just a quick review of the agenda. We've got a background on the draft climate action plan. So we're going to do a light touch because we really want to spend most of today in conversation with you, get your thoughts and reactions, to the draft itself that was sent out last week. And we'll be taking the feedback today. We'll have a survey for you. So Ellen will share that survey link in the chat as well when we get to that point. It's based on the questions that you see in the agenda as well. So we have time to talk about it today, and you'll have time to, of course, continue to provide feedback beyond today's meeting. So today's not the only opportunity to let us know your thoughts on the CAP. And for those who have provided us with some feedback already, thank you very much for that. And Jenny, I meant to say when you're introducing yourself, we've got your questions. We're going to sort of touch base on those in the presentation today, but if we don't answer them fully, please feel free to remind me and we'll make sure that we do. So the moving after the presentation is really the bulk of today's meeting, which is the roundtable questions. So what do you like about the report or think is particularly effective? What gives you pause? What's missing from a definition or explanatory standpoint? So thinking about when this is, all said and done and goes out to the wider public, what could help explain a document a bit better to the reader when people get a hold of it? What would you like to see more emphasis on that's already in the report? And or if we can make it a bit shorter, if you feel that something was perhaps, not necessary to the comprehension and understanding of the plan too, we're happy to hear that as well. We have time today for public comment as well. And then we'll talk about next steps at the end in terms of the online feedback survey. And then this will be going, the draft document will be going for the public feedback period from for the entire month of February. So from February to March 1st. Are there any questions about the agenda? Jenny, I see you're not able to easily see the full slide screen.
Yeah, I can see all the pictures of you guys at the top, and then I just get like a fraction of the slide screen.
You might be able to just adjust your Zoom screen. So usually to the right of the slide, there's a little line. And if you pull it further to the right, you'll see fewer people and you'll see a bigger sort of size of the slide or the screen area itself, the shared screen area itself. Let me know if that helps. All right. No questions on the agenda, so let's just dive right in. So in terms of operating values, same as they've been for our other meetings, we're going to work in rounds and I'll do a speakers list. We want to make sure we hear from each of you. If you don't have anything though that you particularly want to say on a question, that's okay too. Just let us know to pass. Everyone will have a chance to respond and all points of view are welcome. So feel free to build on what's been said or take things in a new direction, as you wish. Your comments are being taken as notes, but not attributed to you to maintain anonymity. And if you can stay on mute when not responding to help with any potential background noise, that would be fantastic. That'll just help keep the participation smooth. All right, next slide. So first off, I just really also wanted to echo what Ellen said and to really thank you. And hopefully this is a bit of a moment of celebration, for you as well. This is the culmination of a lot of work. And it's been going on for quite a while. So we really want to celebrate and thank you for your dedication and your commitment to this project and making the climate action plan for Clackamas County as good as it can be. And so I am always really heartened. One of the things I specialize in climate action planning is engagement itself. And so I'm really happy to be working with you. And it feels like a great privilege that you've dedicated this much time, essentially to the creation of the climate action plan. I don't mean to speak on behalf of the county, but I do know that they are also grateful too for your participation and your dedication. So, I share this image. This is an image I took. It's in Vik in Iceland. And to really I wanted to sort of communicate the epic nature, essentially of not only a climate action planning process in this one, but really because today's meeting is about forward looking and forward momentum, we're on a journey together, to it. This is a multi-decadal effort and it can be exciting and it can probably feel a bit harrowing, sometimes too, but we're on our way to good things. And so to hopefully, a more climate friendly future, as well. So just wanted to sort of pause for a moment and just really say thanks. And again, celebrate your efforts. And I really hope you're feeling good about what we have produced together at this stage. So thank you very much. And of course, the journey continues. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So like I said, light touch, we'll go deeper into parts of the plan if you'd like to when we get to the roundtable questions. But in terms of climate action in Clackamas County and what that means, let's take a look at that. So in terms of the scope of emissions for this project, so scope of emissions is often spoke about in terms of when we take a look at quantification and sort of reporting mechanisms and how does an entity like Clackamas County or any city or any government or even business, start to account for and categorize the emissions essentially themselves. And so according to the US EPA, like scope 1 and 2 emissions, or where a lot of this project and the actions, of course, are focused. Scope 1 emissions are direct greenhouse gas emissions that occur from sources that are controlled or owned by an organization. So for example, the emissions associated with fuel combustion in boilers or furnaces or fleet vehicles, that sort of thing. Scope 2 emissions are indirect greenhouse gas emissions associated with the purchase of electricity, steam, heat, or cooling. And although Scope 2 emissions can physically occur at the facility where they are generated, they are accounted for in an organization's greenhouse gas inventory because they are the result of the organization's energy use. And then scope 3, which we did take a look at, and I'll talk more specifically about that in a minute, but scope 3 are the emissions that are the result of activities from assets not owned or controlled by the reporting organization, but that the organization indirectly affects, sort of in its value chain. So scope 3 emissions include all sources within an organization's, or not within an organization's scope 1 and 2 boundaries. So let's go to the next slide. And those are all the roads there on the graphic in Clackamas County. So in terms of the scopes of emissions, and let's go to the next slide actually itself, in terms of 1 and 2, that's predominantly what the low carbon actions, this is what the low carbon actions essentially are focused on themselves. And so we've got the total there for the amount of community-wide emissions. So when you hear community-wide emissions, scope 1 and 2 are sort of what we're mostly, sort of discussing. So just for points of clarity, I wanted to make sure we sort of reviewed these and sort of the implications of them, because it's also a common sort of, these are common categorizations that climate action planners essentially use and sort of apply to the jurisdictions that I mentioned, like Clackamas County itself or other cities or other like levels of government, sort of to keep consistency when we're talking about the reduction of emissions in the sort of global conversation itself. Let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about scope 3 emissions. So as I mentioned, we did take a look at scope 3 emissions and did do some projections sort of related to those. And I want to talk a bit more specifically about what that means. So you'll see that the circle, the yellow circle itself, extends beyond the boundaries of the graphic of Clackamas County itself. And because this has to do with things that are, and then let's go to the next slide. Essentially, when you're taking a look here at the scope 3 emissions, they're heavily indirect emissions, and the control of them or the reduction of them is not all fully within the jurisdiction of the reporting entity. So that's the reporting entity in this case would be Clackamas County. So certainly choices that Clackamas County can make can start to affect some of the indirect emissions, but it's not fully within their jurisdictional control. Essentially. And much of the choices that we make that are in the scope 3 realm of emissions, or what we call consumption-based emissions, that are addressed, we discussed them in this plan. And like I said, we've quantified essentially what they are. The big impact on them would involve jurisdictions essentially beyond, and or the way your daily life is shaped and the shape of your friends and neighbors and all of the residents of Clackamas County are shaped by things beyond, again, just what Clackamas County can control. So there's a relationship here. That's the important thing, but there isn't as much, sort of essentially direct control. So specifically, like when you take a look at scope 1 in this diagram, the reporting entity, it has to do with things like the fuel use and combustion, like I said, of either vehicles or the operations essentially of the entity itself. And scope 2 is about the purchase of the fuel or electricity used basically in that. From there, we start to see things like when you take a look, for example, at the purchase of goods and services, right? There's a limited amount of jurisdictional sway, essentially that any government has over what it is that you purchase, in the general sort of market. Of course, there's a relationship there, but there's that, full control doesn't exist with any one, sort of entity. So when you're talking about scope 3 emissions as well, you're talking about things like, how do we change, and reduce the emission sources with the food chain, in its entirety? And then what would Clackamas County's role, essentially be in that amongst the other actors, essentially at play? And when I said that some of these choices too are more or less difficult, depending on larger sort of systemic factors that you've already inherited, and sort of already find yourself living in, versus individual choices that people can make to reduce emissions themselves. So the entire spectrum of those choices comes into play with scope 3 emissions. And let's go to another example. And so when I say that some sort of choices have been made for you, the cities of New York and Los Angeles are sort of good examples of systemic choices that were made in the past that largely affect your ability as an individual to make choices to reduce your emissions, and or entities like governments to now make interventions to sort of design cities in a low carbon fashion. So New York, of course, is very dense, right? We see a lot of densification in New York. There is compact enough, sort of populations for really good public transit. So the New York subway is, of course, the most famous example. And then we take a look at the city of Los Angeles, and it also, I actually showed up there for the first time ever on a bike. I rode my bike down from Vancouver down into Los Angeles, which was pretty exciting and interesting because Los Angeles is well known for being a car-centric culture, and you think about the sort of urban planning choices that took place in both of these cities, and you now see the systemic effect of those choices. We have larger freeways. There's more car dependency in general, of course, in Los Angeles itself, and so the choices that both of these cities themselves would make in terms of decarbonization are already affected by some of these larger choices that have been made in the past, and the sort of objectives and values that they wanted to sort of enact. So let's go to the next slide, please. Sorry, I caught something in my throat there. So this is scope 3. So again, like you said, it extends beyond the boundaries itself, of course, of Clackamas County. Doing action planning for consumption-based emissions is a conversation that needs to take place involving additional planning with other jurisdictions and interventions. And so we have the total, though, like I mentioned, we did do some projections, and I wanted to sort of give Chris a moment to talk about what projections and modeling looks like for consumption-based emissions. And I'm just going to take a drink and sort of get rid of this tickle in my throat.
So I guess scope 3 emissions add a layer of complexity that just, I guess, was outside of the scope of this project, or the scope of work that was required. You're definitely looking at data sources that are outside of the boundary of Clackamas that are, can be difficult to get. And then you're also looking at projecting the evolution of income levels within the county that are also challenging to project in ways that, a lot of the other projections that we're doing are a lot simpler. So in that case, taking or focusing on the scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are a good chunk in themselves, and having that as the starting point for the county was kind of the decision that was made. And not to say that scope 3 emissions aren't important and definitely should be worked on, but the focus was generally made to again, if you want the kind of the low hanging fruit in this case, even though some of that fruit is not necessarily so low hanging, as you all know, there's going to be a lot of effort and work required to tackle those emissions as well.
I'll come to you in just a moment, Jenny. So thanks, Chris. So that's kind of the point when it comes to climate action planning. We find that it can't be everything, do you know what I mean, sort of all at once. We need to sort of start practically somewhere. And so generally the recommendations in climate action planning are to begin with the reporting entity. So again, in this case, Clackamas County, with what it is more closely within their direct control, and also while working outwards, you know what I mean, eventually to also influence things that would take place, of course, in scope 3. Jenny.
Yeah, it's interesting because the consumption-based emissions are higher than the community-wide emissions, but it's unclear to me, they're overlapping circles, right? So products that are produced for consumption use fuel, are produced in buildings that use energy and fuel for transportation, and those do fall within scope 1 and 2. So there's obviously some overlap between both of these, and makes it a little bit messy, but it also suggests that we do have some access to controlling the consumption-based emissions because of that overlap. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, that's right. And so it's really about, we do have some control and we do have some influence, because of course, in a system like this, like through scopes 1 through 3, right? When you start to make reductions in one area, it does start to affect, you know what I mean? Like the entire chain of emissions, if you will, kind of thing too. And that's why this was the scoping of emissions has been, and still is, like an ongoing discussion about how to best, sort of divide it up, right? And talk about it. And so you overlay that here in this particular case with, again, like the jurisdictional control, right? What can we most directly influence? Because a win in the reduction of emissions in the general building operations, do you know what I mean, for Clackamas County, can do all sorts of things too that we can't predict, but maybe that is enough of the enabler, right? To start some more system-wide, you know what I mean, sort of reductions in that place. And when the county is taking a look at how we handle things like, how are we going to decarbonize, like deeply decarbonize the existing residential building stock, right, in Clackamas County, they have to start to ask questions about, what amount of private investment is needed, what amount of government funding is needed, how do we incentivize homeowners, how do we ensure equity takes place? That's what a climate action plan sets you up to do. And of course, then starts to affect, like you said, the related, do you know what I mean, sort of factors, essentially to emissions in society, really is what we're talking about. So yeah, consumption-based emissions are big. and important. So it's not as if doing what is recommended in the climate action plan doesn't affect them. It does, but then there's also broader conversations that need to continue to happen between now, of course, and 2050 to continue to reduce them in scope 3 too. Chris, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I guess, the point of we're not, haven't been able to, or, we're not looking at the whole range of consumption, like how many emissions go into the production of the iPod that somebody, or, the iPhone that somebody purchased. So that's, that would, this number is incorporating, those emissions, and we're just saying that those are out of the scope of what we're looking at here. We're definitely looking at more things like, there's actions to reduce the amount of driving that's happening in Clackamas County, and that would definitely impact in the amount of scope 3 emissions that are going on. If you don't need to purchase a car, then that's a car that's not being built, and those emissions aren't being associated with the the activity in the county, even though we're not necessarily measuring how much emissions are related to that car in that direct sense. So there is definitely a lot of fuzziness there, but to say that we're looking at all the different pieces of consumables that people are in Clackamas are purchasing, and the emissions associated with that is a bigger task than we had time for in this project. So it's those are not being looked at directly, but are important. And yeah, Jeff agreed. There is a lot to be said for high hanging fruit, and I think we are still picking at a lot of high hanging fruit as part of this project.
Yeah, the size of the challenge that exists in what we have in this plan are big. They're not low. It's the sort of thing too. And they're common challenges that many jurisdictions are facing. And having done this for almost 20 years, I can tell you that I see maybe glimpses of success, but nobody's doing a wide scale enough, like focus on even the actions that we are recommending. There's a lot of work and acceleration of that work that needs to be done to get us there. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right. So the response to climate change. So important note too is that this is a strategic level plan, not a feasibility plan. So high level document that outlines an organization's overall goals and objectives and the strategies and actions that will be taken to achieve them. It covers a longer time horizon and provides a broad overview of the organization's directions and plans. Whereas a feasibility study is the detailed analysis of a specific project, right, or a specific action or proposed course of action to determine if it's viable and likely to be successful. It typically includes a thorough examination of the technical, economic, and operational aspects of the project, as well as an assessment of any risks or challenges that may need to be addressed. So if you think of it too as like the higher level, like that's where the strategic level plan is, but it sets the stage for like what feasibility studies do we need to do next to be successful to implement the recommendations in the climate action plan. So just as a way of saying that, don't expect feasibility study like answers, you know what I mean, in a cap. It's step one. Those types of things come next when we move into implementation, or as the county moves into implementation once this planning process is complete. So it provides more guidance on the implementation of action and the future studies, that would be necessary to be fully successful. The way that, more said another way, the way that Clackamas County approaches, again, the decarbonization of residential and commercial building stock might be different than in other jurisdictions. And so it will have its own feasibility studies to find out what the most successful way to do that would be. And that would be probably a combination of factors like, that's when you're talking about policies, regulations, incentivization programs, what's the right mix of that, to a feasibility study helps set you up to set those programs up to be really successful. Next slide. So as a reminder, the Clackamas County's target is to reach carbon neutrality in emissions by 2050. And the CAP is supposed to be designed to set the stage to achieve the following community-wide outcomes. So that reduce greenhouse gas emissions to carbon neutral, reduce community-wide and consumption emissions, and adapt to climate change and reduce climate-related risk. Let's take the next slide. And so there's a mitigation and an adaptation, of course, focus and approach. The actions, of course, in the climate action plan are heavily mitigation focused. There's an overlap between mitigation and adaptation that you see there too in actions like building weatherization or water and energy conservation or the building of green infrastructure itself or focusing on smart growth, or also known as the sort of urban planning, quest to build more compact, sort of complete communities. And so, thanks, Jenny. There is an emissions reduction target, and carbon neutrality in and of itself is sort of thought of as a target, and targets work as part of a constellation to drive action. So I'd say they're one component of a system that helps us get that. Certainly, there's also just what I can share with you too, is we've set targets. I was part of British Columbia's first climate action plan, and we set some pretty stringent targets for 2012 and 2018 with some serious action and policies and a government that was really in line with climate action. And we didn't meet the targets, but a lot of action started to get underway, as well. So the targets were certainly helpful, but I would say I wouldn't necessarily agree that it doesn't mean anything not to have a target. But in this particular case, we do have a target and we do have outcomes and actions too. So I sort of see it as a complete sort of constellation of things. So let's go to the next slide. So in the general high-level CAP development process was we began with targeted engagement with interested and affected parties, or also known as stakeholders, with both county staff and of course the community, with yourself and sort of folks like yourself. We've done data analysis and some technical modeling to inform the targets, pathways, and recommendations. And we've reviewed the local context, including current plans and policies. So you see those in the business as planned, sort of scenario projection, legislation, demographics, and climate action readiness, and a review of best practices. And we've continued with broad public engagement. And of course, the CAP will go to broader public comment, of course, for the month of February. Next slide. Outcome 1. So the big outcome here. So this section of the report focuses on how Clackamas County can act to reduce its community-wide emissions. So thinking scope 1 and 2 from the major non-consumption based sectors in the community. And so the focus is on buildings in the residential, institutional, commercial, and industrial space, transportation, and waste. Next slide. So these are the two sort of projected scenarios. The top line is the BAP, or the business as planned scenario. So taking a look, of course, of a course of action where if the plans and policies related to climate, but not specifically low carbon and not target driven, continued on, you sort of see a projection of emissions into the future, and you see a bit of a dip. And if you were to extend this out beyond 2050, that BAP line would eventually start to turn up again. So it would be heading back in the sort of wrong direction. So the story here is essentially that low carbon planning, that type of intervention in the system is going to be needed to get to that green line. So getting us down essentially to that particular target. So that would be the low carbon target without sequestration. Chris, did you want to add anything to this before we go to the next slide?
Yeah, just to point out, as many of you may know already, so obviously this, as we've talked about at the beginning, this project has been going on for a little while, and lots of changes have happened in Oregon that would probably be, that we would have included in the BAP, such as like HB 2021 and the CP Climate Protection Program, CPP. And so they didn't make it into that, but we did include those as part of the kind of low carbon actions to account for the implementation of those policies in the work here. So just to say that those happened kind of after we've gotten far enough into the project where we didn't want to go back and redo work that was already done.
So yeah, we included them in the low carbon scenario. So they are in there just in a different spot than they normally are. And then, so this gets us to the 83% reduction that you see that we're discussing in the plan. If we go to the next slide, and Jenny, this was one of your questions too as well. So in terms of when we say sequestration can get us to 0, this is what we're talking about. So that's in the amount of 0.7 million metric tons. And it's the Oregon Global Warming Commission that has a statewide goal of sequestering an additional 5 million. I'm going to get the units, essentially wrong on this one. I'm switching between US and Canadian sort of units are sort of in my mind. So and that's tons of CO2e per year by 2030 and 9.5 million by 2050. Relative, their baseline is 2019 activity. So in terms of being able to get there and what that actually looks like in terms of what needs to be done will be big, sort of in and of itself. But it looks like work done by the Global Warming Commission there sort of supports essentially the possibility of getting to 0 in the future. Anything you'd add to that, Chris? Yeah, it is a statewide target. And as far as I know, they don't have one particular to Clackamas County, but it would be in the 0.7. It would be that sort of difference between the low carbon target line there and headed to 0.
think it probably might want to be made clear here, this is in addition to what's currently being sequestered. You know, I think currently it's around 29 to 30 million metric tons per year. And Clackamas County currently sequesters about 2.5 million metric tons per year, plus or minus about 0.75 million metric tons per year.
Yeah, that's right, David. That would be in addition to what's already been there. Yeah, we can make that clear.
Okay, I just made note of that too, so that we can update that. Thank you for that, Dave. And that's also just again, at a strategic level, this is about showing the general, sort of pathway and again, size of the challenge, you know what I mean, essentially to get there. The specifics too are always going to matter at each place, but this sort of helps sort of guide us or think about it as a bit of a North Star. Sort of, and there's a question there for you in the question. Did you say, you said 2.5, was it million metric tons, David?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, there you go, Jenny. All right, so the BAP, it illustrates a likely scenario of community energy use and greenhouse gas emissions between 2018 and 2050, based on the community taking no additional action, right? So this is if you didn't do a climate action plan, beyond the current policies and practices that are in place or are guaranteed through government plans and committed funding. It accounts for the county's population and demographic trends and estimates energy use and emissions data, uses energy and emissions data from information from local, state, and federal governments to inform the modeling assumptions about buildings, transportation, and energy generation, and solid and liquid waste. The assumptions were reviewed by county staff and the CATF itself before being modeled. Clackamas County's BAP shows declining greenhouse gas emissions in the community, with emissions expected to decrease by 19%. Or approximately 4.1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents in 2018 to approximately 3.3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Energy use is expected to increase slightly from 49 million MMBTUs to 52 million MMBTUs, or 6% over that same period. These opposing trends indicate essentially that there will be a partial shift towards energy sources that are less emissions intensive, resulting in fewer emissions per unit of energy used. And to go a bit deeper into the BAP, over to Chris.
Thanks. So I think you've seen all of these slides before. None of these results should be new to you. So just as Naomi outlined, you can see that there is a reduction of emissions. So there are some things that are going on that we did capture in the BAP originally. So there is the adoption of electric vehicles. We did try and capture the reduction in travel as a result of COVID that happened in the county, well, everywhere. Some of the other things there, this also captures land use plans that the county currently has, and updates in building codes for new buildings. So those are kind of some of the main things that it's capturing. So that's where the emissions reductions are coming from. So you can see that we're reducing emission, and also the grid was getting cleaner originally, but as I mentioned, HB 2021 would make that reduction even stronger. And then also the climate. Sorry, I'm working in Washington a while, and they have a CCA, and one has a CPP, and I can't remember now which is which, but they're both very similar as well. But you would also see a reduction in fossil fuels as well coming from that, which are not captured in that business plan, but it was introduced as part of the low carbon actions. And then, as Naomi said, even though the emissions are going down, energy consumption is going up, basically because population is increasing, but we're using energy more efficiently. So that's and cleaner fuels, switching away mainly from transportation related emission or energy use. So gasoline and diesel and so forth.
And so in terms of thanks for that, Chris, in terms of the hierarchy itself, right, in terms of thinking of actions, in terms of what we want to do, where we can, of course, we just want to avoid doing them in the first place, right, where that's most feasible and possible. So avoiding the activities that generate emissions or require energy. If that's not possible, we want to focus on reduction. So reducing the energy required by using less and by avoiding wasted energy. And sort of the story that Chris was telling too about, and as I've said, the curve would eventually go up in the BAP sort of scenario, is that while we might, be more efficient users of energy, if the overall load and demand keeps going up, then eventually, even with efficiencies, emissions go up. So reduction is really important. Once we've been able to max that out, you're looking at replacing or wanting to switch to renewable energy sources itself. Then you'd want to be removing, so using natural systems to, or technology to sequester greenhouse gas emissions, for example. And then when all of that has been done and nothing more can be done because of current technology or other challenges, you want to invest in emissions reductions initiatives to decrease their costs and address local emissions that cannot be eliminated for a lower cost itself. So this is an emissions reduction hierarchy that we use in our planning process. Next slide, please. All right, so the critical sectors for decreasing emissions. So this is essentially how the actions, sort of themselves are really grouped. So we're looking at, of course, I talked a little bit about building retrofits, or what does that deep decarbonization, sort of start to look like when we move to implementation itself. And then we move on to, we've got net zero new construction. So you've got your existing building stock. And then what do we do about, of course, new buildings that are coming into the county itself, of course, and being built? And what kind of actions can we take essentially to make sure that they also aren't, sometimes in buildings, a building can be referred to as a quote, a 50-year mistake, because you're thinking about building that asset. And so the choices we can make now in that hierarchy, right, of course, lead to sort of better low carbon outcomes, essentially for us in the future. And then taking a look at renewable energy and generation. So that switch, sort of principle that I talked about in the hierarchy as well. So switching to renewable energy generation itself. And let's go to the next slide. There's 6 in total. So increasing active transportation and transit use, certainly one of the toughest sectors where we want to sort of start to see a mode shift, going. So we like our cars, essentially. And of course, electric vehicles can be a good choice as well, but it's not the entire sort of portion of the story. So how do we get more people rolling and walking and riding their bikes and, using transit, as well, and other forms of active transportation in order to get to the destinations or where they need to go. We want to, of course, reduce vehicle emissions for the vehicles that are part of the system, itself, and also that sort of ties to switching energy sources. And we want to reduce waste emissions as well. So those are the critical sectors that are addressed in the action plan. And let's take a look, of course, now at the low carbon scenario. So we've sort of set the bar of where the size of the challenge is. And while this might look like a good fun toboggan run, of course, of a graph, essentially too, it also sort of really describes how quickly, it is that everything essentially needs to reduce. So Chris is going to take us through that in more detail.
So again, shouldn't be a new slide to anybody. We've showed this one before. So a lot of the reductions are due to aggressively reducing our energy consumption in the building sector by either building to high standards of energy consumption for new buildings, or retrofitting the existing building stock to deep levels of thermal retrofits. So no small challenge, obviously, a big challenge to tackle, but lots of definitely co-benefits and benefits to the homeowners for doing those types of things. Mode shifting away from transportation options. So definitely high penetration of electric vehicles, especially personal use electric vehicles. And zero emission vehicles on the commercial side of things, but also impact and trying to look at different ways of getting more active transportation in the urban places of Clackamas County. And then as you can see, that the trickier ones to decarbonize are like in the industrial sectors. So obviously there's we tried to cut as deep as we could there. But those can be a challenging processes to decarbonize sometimes. So a lot of the emissions are left over in kind of the industrial and some of the agricultural sectors where there's still livestock kicking around in Clackamas County going forward. So by fuel, you can see the biggest amount of fuel type left over is the non-energy The non-energy being, waste emissions, so methane from, landfill and things like that, and would be from agriculture. So, the burping and the farting of the animals that are in there, and then also fugitive emissions from, the distribution of any fossil fuels that are left over within the county. But you can see that there's been large cuts in the emissions around grid electricity, around gasoline, natural gas as well, being replaced by RNG, and so forth.
And so to underscore this point too, though, this is the big takeaway, is that all of the actions that tackle, like in this plan, that are based on these critical sectors to create the low carbon scenario must be implemented. So in order to reach the target. And so this is where the combination of moving on actions and targets work, essentially together. Remove an action, you're not going to get to the target, essentially. So it's not about picking actions and thinking these will work and these won't work. You can't do them all right out of the gate all at once. You need to order how you do them. But in order to get to that target, all of them need to be implemented. And so we've included that note, of course, in the plan itself. And then in terms of the low carbon benefits, we've outlined them here in the plan. Let's just sort of take a look here for a second at that. We'll go to the next slide. So in terms of, you see them sort of addressed in these sort of categories. And so if we talk about air quality itself, I don't want to have to read it all out to you from the report, but when we're talking about additional benefits, that's what co-benefits kind of really are to climate action. So it's really sort of a good story here at the end of the day, is there positive effects that a policy or measure might have beyond its primary objective, right? Sort of thing too. So these are some of those additional benefits. And the way that Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD, talks about this is that co-benefits are effects that are valued in the mitigation, so emissions reductions, side of things, costs of a policy or action, whereas ancillary or additional benefits are effects that are incidental and not always accounted for in the analysis. In this analysis, co-benefits are assumed to be any potential or anticipated benefits of the action in addition to its impact on greenhouse gas emissions. And what we also just wanted to show here too is we get very specific. We talk in sort of the three ways about equity, from intergenerational equity to income inequality and global equity is what we mean when we're talking about that particular co-benefit. Next slide. In terms of capturing the economic opportunity, let's take a look at that. So the story on this one is that the upfront large investments lead to the bigger returns on investment in the form of jobs and long-term low carbon savings. And so overall, the implementing the low carbon scenario to address, so all of those actions to address the emissions is projected to generate a net return of $5.6 billion across the county above the business as planned scenario. So it's a good story. It's a good news story at the end of the day. Which is fantastic. Let's go to the next slide. And Chris is going to describe a little bit more about what this chart means.
Yep. So part of the way we do our financial analysis is we compare the low carbon actions to the business as planned scenario, and take the difference and show the kind of the net capital costs, energy costs, and operation and maintenance costs. Between the actions that we've implemented or explored and what's in the business as planned. So it doesn't include necessarily all of the costs. Like it doesn't include big infrastructure costs, for example, associated with all like the utility sector and HB 2021 or things like that. Those are a little bit out of the scope of kind of Clackamas County costs. But it does include, for example, the cost of retrofitting the house, or purchasing an electric vehicle, or installing more bike lanes in an urban area to promote more active transportation. So what we're seeing here is kind of the net investment and returns, and so you can see that there is an outlay of capital costs, and mainly these are definitely around the building stock and retrofitting existing buildings, because that is an expensive proposition to go in and retrofit buildings that are already there. But you can see that there are, that does create some benefits as far as reducing the energy required, to operate those buildings, as well as the energy required, for transportation, as electric vehicles are much more efficient than internal combustion engines. And then you can see after 2039, around 2040, that's when kind of our major investments finish. So that's when the transition in our actions stops, and you know, all of the transition has occurred, and so the capital investment decreases, but you still get the benefits from those investments going forward. So you know, retrofitting a building has a you know, an upfront capital cost, but then the benefits of that investment carry on for the lifetime of that building. And so that's what the kind of the tail of this graph is showing you. We're also, you know, capture as best we can the employment benefits of doing this. So so when there's a capital investment, there's also employment opportunities to create employment for doing that. So again, retrofitting buildings is a good example. You know, that requires labor and trades to come in and do that work. So we are using employment intensities from, excuse me, let me just pull that up. Where are they coming from? Oh, from the Economic Policy Institute. But you also see some job losses as well. So the introduction of electric vehicles also actually, so we're not basing that on capital costs. We're looking at the maintenance costs associated with those, as you know, they require less maintenance. And so, you know, there's the possibility that, you know, garages and auto repair could lose some jobs based on the adoption of those electric vehicles. So, you know, I'm trying to be as agnostic as possible and show the whole picture and whole story there. But this is for each of the different kind of actions what employment could look like. And we're also projecting person years of employment. So we're not saying, you know, jobs are going to be created in perpetuity. We're saying in this year, this is the number of person years of employment that's going to happen. And that could change from year to year, depending on the activity or the investment that's going on within the community as well.
Thanks, Chris. And so we see more person years of employment, slightly more person years of employment in the low carbon scenario than just business as planned. And let's talk about the limitations, of course, of this. And then we're going to go back, Jenny, to that slide. So it's a scenario, it's a current best guess estimate of implementing the low carbon actions, but it is very sensitive to change. So for example, the introduction of new technology that causes individuals to make currently unexpected changes to reduce emissions can change, of course, the financial scenario. The financial scenario is also sensitive to changes in energy prices. As we've seen in recent years, energy prices can fluctuate widely based on global events such as pandemics and wars. Higher fossil fuel energy prices will mean a low carbon future for the county, will create even more value, under those circumstances. These global events cannot be reliably predicted, but if some of the energy prices were to increase while others remain stable or vice versa, the price of the scenario would change drastically and could push individuals and governments to make different choices, of course, about energy sources. If we can go back, Chris, to one of the low carbon, the one with waste, the LCS, Jenny had a question about that. Jenny, did you want to unmute yourself and ask us?
Oh yeah, I think it's not this one, it's the next one. There you go. Yeah, just it's actually everything is decreasing except for waste. And I just want to put an exclamation point on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And it's also interesting because it overlaps also with the consumption-based emissions issue, that scope 3, that is actually a larger piece of emissions than the ones that we're actually addressing, scopes 1 and 2. But this is an area of great overlap. So I just want to make sure we end up at the end of this report addressing the waste piece. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. We're almost at the end here. I want to make sure there's lots of time for more questions and conversation and getting your feedback. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we want to also outcome 2 is reduce consumption-based emissions. And we go to the next slide. So shifts are typically needed in individual choices and other shifts, including less carbon intensive construction materials. And so essentially what we're talking about here is that we would need to be using, of course, less carbon intensive building and construction materials across the community. Individual choices, of course, are outside the scope of this project. So you wouldn't expect to see actions essentially about like regulating the choices that people are going to make at the grocery store, essentially, for example. And when the consumption-based emissions are included in Clackamas County's BIP, the emissions increased by 11% between 2018 and 2050, from 7.2 million metric tons of CO2 to nearly 8 as well. And so I talked a little bit already about New York and Los Angeles, of course, too. And so this is the consumption-based emissions too, are largely, of course, where this story of individual versus societal choices sort of come together. And that's what makes them sort of interesting and challenging, essentially to tackle as well as we go forward. And certainly this is tied to waste, Jenny, in your question, you know what I mean, as well, very closely. Yeah. And it's a problem everywhere, right? As well. So let's go to the next slide. Yep, and it's true that consumption can be pushed, essentially, by industry and other factors as well. All right, so outcome 3, it's about adapting to climate change and reducing the climate-related risk. We've certainly had a lot of great discussions too, and facilitated discussions with community members about this topic as well. So let's take a look at the cost of inaction. Or hazards first, in Clackamas County, of course, that identified, of course, you're experiencing these temperature pattern changes, precipitation pattern changes, certainly snowpack and runoff, extreme heat, drought, wildfire, and floods. And I'm sure it's not too difficult for anyone here to think about examples that match exactly these types of hazards that are kind of currently happening. Next slide. And in terms of the cost of inaction, so studies essentially point to climate change being a threat multiplier. The frequency and severity of natural events are increased under a climate that, of course, is warming and fostering unstable and fluctuating conditions. This is accompanied by increased costs incurred to response to climate change, of course, events. Limiting climate change impacts through greenhouse gas emissions reductions mitigation has costs, but these are dwarfed, of course, as we see here, by the cost of inaction, which will increase with each year of action not being taken. It's also important why it's important. This is also underscores why it's very important to start planning, or start the action implementation of the plan as soon as possible as well. Various studies have modeled the estimated economic damages of climate change impacts. The World Resources Institute summarizes several studies in its 10 charts show the economic benefits, of course, of U.S. climate action. And sort of this summary of this figure demonstrates how the damages from climate change and its associated recovery costs will increase the longer action, of course, is delayed. That's the bottom line on this graph. And let's go to the next one. And it just is more specific, of course, to Oregon in terms of taking a look at the disaster types events and the essential cost, essentially, that with them as well, that we can see, of course, is not insignificant as well. So these are billion-dollar events, essentially, that have affected Oregon from 1980 to 2020. Okay, next slide. I think that just got out of whack. And so in terms of short-term implementation as well, and taking a look, of course, at what is going to set the county up very well to move into implementation, we have some recommendations on that. Let's go to the next slide. So we recommend that there's the hiring of dedicated staff at the county administration level to manage and seek funding for implementation, of course, of the CAP itself. We find in best practices too that the higher up the offices that are dedicated to climate change can be, the better the implementation is throughout, of course, the entire organization, essentially as well. So that's a key reason behind this recommendation. We wanted them to be able to confirm and apply for funding from federal and state programs aligned with action implementation, and work we're doing between now and the next meeting that's already underway is taking a look too at the sort of current funding opportunities, as well, that exist, and sort of compiling them into a very large spreadsheet at the moment too. We recommend that they establish an ongoing advisory committee, so something similar perhaps to the CATF, with members from the public to provide ongoing feedback and support the implementation initiatives, because this is the really long part of the journey. If you think back to the photo I had at the beginning of this presentation, we recommend identification and evaluation readiness of key potential partners to assist with implementation of actions not fully within Clackamas County's jurisdictional control. We certainly see Scope 3 emissions as being a real driver, sort of this type of partnership, and establish a set of key performance indicators to report on progress and challenges related to implementation, because it's not a linear success story when it comes to implementation. What I can tell you too in my experience is that there's lots of implementation that happens and we learn things along the way, and we didn't maybe get there initially in our first step where we wanted to, but we learned how to get there through the process, of implementation, or learned how to make better moves, essentially after that. Next slide, please. So now we have time for the roundtable discussion. And so wanting to sort of go by question, and we want to be able to hear from each of you from each of those questions. And we'll go to some questions that have been in the chat, as well. But we want to open up to, what do you like about the report or think is particularly effective? And who would like to speak first about that? And while we're doing that, I'm going to go back and take a look and see if there's other questions in the chat that we can answer as well. Yes, go ahead, Valerie.
I would just say, when I look through this, I think the thing that's most effective is that it really shows how important this is and the consequences of not moving forward with the climate action plan.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Chris, if I can get you to take a look at questions in the chat too, to let me know, that'd be great. And we're going to go to Adam next.
It's very overwhelming. I mean, looking at these numbers, this is a mountain we have to climb together. But in the world that I've been sort of working in recently, I also think there are so many things that we're going to find along the way. I think that got talked about that don't exist in any of this modeling, that we have opportunities to develop entire industries around. So I do feel like a little bit hopeful that there's avenues that maybe aren't included in here because they're unknowns, but like maybe within the government having this recommendation that like we need to be targeting and supporting things that aren't in this program, but will still help us meet those targets.
Definitely.
That's just me chatting forever in my head. So
that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Who would like to go next?
I liked the visuals and graphics. It's such a great way to communicate. I think you could do even more. There are some in our PowerPoint today, like the co-benefits graphic, and it's just really great to take advantage of those visual tools for all different readers of the document.
Great, thank you. That's really good to know. Thanks, Julia. Nina.
I guess I just wanted to make sure, and I know you touched on this briefly, that if you guys haven't modeled the CPP in this fully, that's really a miss, because on the energy side with House Bill 2021 and the executive order, you're already getting your building use down to 90% by 2050 without the county having to do one thing.
Yeah, definitely. It's modeled in the LCS instead of the BAP. So it is included just in the low carbon scenario instead of the BAP. That's what Chris was saying. You came out at a time when we'd already done the BAP, so we made sure we included it there.
And then I guess my question to that is, if you know if that is the case and both the utilities are bound by it, do you think that you could instead, I'm just curious to see, without doing anything, you're going to get that reduction. Does that mean you could take the money that you have for retrofits and do something else with it?
I would argue, Nina, that doesn't mean the county doesn't have to do anything just because of the CPP. I think anything that the county can do to help with that implementation would just make the transformation stronger. So building retrofits could, definitely the utilities could support the doing building retrofits or making building retrofits happen, but that's also something that the county could support as well. So I don't think it's an either or type of situation.
And if it was like in the theory that like let's say money somehow was not needed for retrofits, like you brought up, it'd be hard to say because it would depend too where some of the money was coming from. If it was directly county sourced, of course it's easier. I can't speak for them about what they would do, but in theory, it's easy for them to then reallocate those funds to the next most difficult, emissions reductions actions that are there that are also not, say, the best candidates for investment, elsewhere, or maybe funding's not happening from another jurisdictional level, again, depending on what the size of the challenge is. So theoretically, yeah, that money could be shifted, Yeah. Thanks for that. Who would like to, Nina, did you still have another question, Nina, or?
Yeah, I guess my one thing would be, I also am curious, and this is for a longer discussion probably later, but I think the community investment opportunities that the CPP puts forward could really help fund some of the sequestration or accelerate some of the sequestration. And so I think that there's some real opportunities to nuance this a little bit more and make it easier to get to the number we're looking for.
Great. Yeah. And like we said, too, like we welcome, sort of feedback like that, too, like for these questions, too, like in the survey or just, sort of directly to us would be good, too. So thank you for that. Who else on the task force would like to talk about what you like about the report or think is effective? Jeff.
Yeah, on I think the co-benefits is a strong area. And because of that, I think it is underemphasized. Not just in terms of how much space it's taken up, but there are additional examples, potential examples of co-benefits that also tie into other county activities that I think would be worth emphasizing. But I'd pick one thing that is a bright spot that could be brighter. That would be it.
Okay, great. Thank you. I mean, feel free to also tell us in the feedback, but if you've also got a particular example that you think is strong, you know, in the co-benefit story too, that deserves better emphasis too, please let us know. Great. Who else? Edgar, or do you prefer Ed? I know you introduced yourself as Ed. Which would you prefer?
Either way's fine.
Okay.
Ed,
All right.
Edgar, Eddie, just not Edward.
Okay, you got it.
So I wanted to comment on what I like in the plan, and I'm not going to comment on everything I like, but I'll pick one thing for now. And that is, I like the section with the heading Climate Action Imperative. I read that and I thought, wow, this is really good. I really enjoyed reading that part of the plan. It just made me feel like, you know, I was getting good vibes. And I think, you know, good vibes is a good thing in a plan like that. So that was very helpful. I would add that any words that you can use that show relationship and interconnectedness and care for our common home are worth at least talking about. And perhaps you might consider including the voice of the Youth Advisory Task Force in that section. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. All right, wonderful. Who else? Who would like to go next? I might just do a check-in. Bill Street, I don't think you've had a chance to chat. Did you have anything you wanted to add, or would you like to pass?
No, I'm fine. I think that your technical pieces throughout the report are wonderful. To the point that to a non-technician, I think much messaging is lost. And I'll get to that when we get to the what gives you pause piece.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Fantastic. Okay, Dave.
I think, you know, from a standpoint of being particularly effective, I think it's visually appealing. I'm thinking that maybe the best thing is to not take up time is like I did before, if I wrote out a list of things that some suggestions going forward and then just sending it to you. Would that make sense?
Sure, that would be wonderful. Thank you for that. All right. Lisa, so yeah, you said you agree on focusing on positive benefits would be useful. Win-win is a great strategy. Things that you think were particularly effective or that you liked. Anything to add?
Well, the graphics are wonderful and great. I think a lot of things people have already said, but yeah, I agree that some of this is going to be way too technical, and that's kind of a turnoff to people who, you know, if they read something they don't understand it, it's harder for them to get behind.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Dan, wanted to check in with you. What do you think about what stands out or is effective?
I don't really have any comments to that at this point. Yeah.
No problem. Julie, wanted to check in with you too. And then we'll go to Bill Avison.
Sorry, no comments at this time.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Bill.
I think I'll underscore what Dave was saying. I have highlighted throughout the PDF some corrections or maybe things that could be reduced. You know, I think that is in your comment there at the end. What can we remove? It is a very complex document, as we all know. One of the areas that kind of struck me, I think it's great, is you talk about the $5 billion that the county is going to receive by new employment. I think that needs to be explained a little bit more in more depth, particularly to the business community, because they're gonna say, well, how's that gonna work? And then one other comment, and I think I brought this up off and on through the course of this whole year and a half or however long we've been working on this, has there been any movement from the other counties to come up with their own CAP? And I guess when you pull up that slide and you look at your third number 3, as far as the impacts, I forgot particularly what you call it, but the spillover into all the other counties. Again, if you do this and the 2 other major counties in the metro region don't, it's a little frustrating, I think. And it's going to be a hard sell, I think, for the business community if Clackamas County is the only one that does this and we don't pull the others in. So anyway, I don't know if anyone in the county knows or has heard if there's any movement from Multnomah or Washington County.
I could, this is Alex. I could chime in real quick. Sorry. Multnomah County, they have a plan that's done in conjunction with Portland. Oh, there we go. Someone's answer right there. And so sometimes you'll see it called the Portland plan. And maybe I'm biased because my wife works for Multnomah County, but I think that they definitely have a plan that I believe they call it the climate justice plan. But it's, it's out there, but oftentimes you might see it called the Portland plan.
Great. Thank you for that. Good to know, I guess. That's wonderful. Thanks for that, Bill. I appreciate that. Kim, did you have anything you wanted to add for this question?
I mean, it's definitely a lot, but and it seems like most of what I see now is kind of the argument for why we need to implement change. And I guess I'm having a harder time connecting on what the county will actually do. And maybe that's because the implementation plan will be a whole separate document. But it seems like when we get to like how this actually happens and what the county will do to fund, to support efforts, it's like the last page, and it's like one page on the short-term implementation. And so I guess I thought we would see more of what actual actions the county is intending to move forward with.
Yeah, and that's right. So the next meeting, we will have the implementation plan. So what this sets you up for, we'll be reviewing that.
Okay, so this is one piece of, there are different pieces of plans, and this is like the intro and the making the case on why.
You got it, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I guess that wasn't clear to me when I first read this.
Okay, glad we could clarify that though. Thank you for asking that question. Great. Did I miss anyone? Adam, did you get a chance to speak on this, or would you like to?
Yeah, I sort of threw in my
Great.
hat early on, but I still agree. I had that note sort of about positivity. I like what a lot of other folks are talking about with the simplifying a little bit. We can dive into numbers all we want, but what does that graph really mean? So
Definitely. Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll go to Edgar and then we'll go to the next question.
So I just wanted to ask, are we addressing things that are, give us pause now, or are we still on things we like?
We can move into what gives you pause. So if you're ready to go with that, let's kick that off.
Sure. So I like the section on net present value, but I did have some issues with it as well, and I pointed those out in my detailed comments that I submitted this morning. So I'm not going to drag everybody through that. But I would say that I hear and I've read in the plan the importance of doing everything in order to get to the low carbon scenario target in 2050. And while I agree that those are desirable, I don't know that they're very practical. Maybe you'll address it in the feasibility plan, but I would suggest that having some strategic level metric, if you will, for helping make decisions on what gets implemented first or prioritized would be very helpful. And I certainly know that the net present value calculation of various projects can inform that process. So I would like to see a little bit more robust discussion and recommendation on how to use net present value in order to prioritize all of these different things that need to be accomplished, and also to recognize that those projects that currently have a negative or zero net present value may change in the next decade due to innovation. So I think that needs to be included in this analysis in some way to inform the strategic plan going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Edgar. So I
was just
Bill
gonna
Street-
say,
Oh, sorry, go ahead,
yeah,
Chris.
yeah, Edgar, yeah, great points. And, using the kind of MAC curve, you can also, look at, which ones are below the curve and which ones are above. And you can look at looking at programs that can combine good ones, quote unquote, good ones with bad ones, or more expensive ones with cost effective ones. And when you're looking at policies, so there's lots of ways that you can use the MAC curve that we could definitely talk about and touch on in the plan. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we're going to go to Jeff, and then we'll go to Bill Street, and then Valerie. Jeff, can you start?
I can go into great detail online, but I think it was Julia that talked about using the taking advantage of graphics picks. I agree with that. I think we should. There are a lot of words in there. It is really dense. I'd rather see more figures, but even for the ones that we have, I think they could use much clearer labeling so that it's clear to anyone, even if they're unfamiliar with the process, what it means when the bars go above the line, what it means when the bars go below the line, et cetera. I think another big aspect that's missing is the lack of clarity on the assumptions that we're making. One of the things I focused on was the sequestration efforts. That's great if they're all done. I would never assume it's going to happen that way. But if our projections are based on a very specific set of assumptions beyond the scenarios, then I think we need to not only specify that, but indicate that, yeah, there's a chance this isn't going to happen that way. And I think that's a recurring theme throughout.
Great, thank you for that. And sorry, we'll go to Valerie, and then Valerie, and then Nina. Sorry, it's all shifting there in the list there for me. Hi, Valerie.
Hi. Well, on a bigger picture, I think specifically, probably everywhere, but for Clackamas County, I feel like there was this overly positive spin on the areas where we know we have problems, and the big ones I'm seeing are like when I look at the outlay costs, which it's great that they will pay off, but 11.7 billion is 2.3 billion a year over 27 each year for 27 years, and we have a $1.5 billion budget, so that's huge for our county. I know it includes businesses and residential, but it's a huge amount of money for our county. So and then the transportation, we're so much of the transportation in Clackamas County, there's so many roads, and Metro controls our main bus system. So I think it would be nice to, acknowledge that there are issues here and then go into ways to deal with them. But I'm not, both of these areas, I think a lot of people are going to read this and just kind of not believe they're feasible. And then specifically in the document, back on that net present value thing, I read a lot of stuff and I had a hard time understanding because it says residential buildings and it shows this positive thing in non-residential, and then 2 lines later it says residential, non-residential again, and it doesn't define how these they're different. And so I think this is really dense, and it's going to be a lot hard for a lot of people to understand. So there needs to be some clearer explanation, in particular on that table on page 54 and 55. Thanks.
Okay. Great, thank you. I anticipated too, there probably is more to say about the MAC curve, and MPV. So thank you for that. Appreciate that, Valerie. Okay, we have Nina, and then we're going to go to Dave.
I guess the thing that gives me pause is I think there's a lot of good work. I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities for us to explore. I really am reluctant to bring this to the commissioners and have them put their names to something without understanding the feasibility and the cost implications for some of these major things, because people have a ceiling of what they are comfortable paying, and it might be a little different right now. And the number one thing I don't want us to do is I don't want us to bring forth something that the commission votes on for us to find out it's infeasible, and we wasted a lot of time that we should be doing the good work that we can do. And they can't make good decisions unless they know what this is going to cost to some extent.
Great. Okay, thanks, Dinah. All right, we're going to go to Dave and then Bill Street.
Okay, I think just like I say, I'm going to summarize the more detailed comments in writing. That way it saves people time. But broad sense regarding the net present value analyses, I think what was brought up is important. I think we need to better appreciate if you could better lay out what the assumptions are in those net present value analyses, because like any sort of economic modeling, it can be completely bogus to something more accurate. So it'd be helpful to understand what your assumptions are there. And then for some of the other things too, like anything else, there's no 100% correct answer. There's always error associated with anything. And so it'd be helpful to understand what the plus or minus is in any of these assumptions, just in the global sense. And then, you know, kind of related to that, the last thing was the that one graph you had, the bar chart with the precipitous drop. You know, I think it was in the economic analysis and capitalization and whatnot. It would be interesting to know what assumptions led to that precipitous cliff, because I mean, to me, Clackamas County is 400,000 cats all doing their own separate thing, and how we could achieve some sort of a, you know, very precipitous drop in anything within the course of a year or two seems kind of unrealistic, unless there's something going on there that, you know, I'm not aware of. So anyway, it'd be helpful to explain those things a little bit more in depth in the final report. Thanks.
Sure. Which graph was that, Dave? Just so I'm noting that here, or I mean, I'm sure it'll come in your comments, but it's so I'm clear.
It's the net implementation one.
Yeah.
The net present value one?
Yeah.
Or the MAC curve, the marginal abatement cost? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and you know, that drop is basically what we're showing is, you know, when an investment made, then all of that investment is paid up front. Still, obviously, that's not the case in the real world. Usually investments are amortized over a number of years. And so the drop is basically meaning that in that next year, there's not a lot of major investments. For example, all the buildings have been retrofit based on the assumptions we put in that action. So, you know, that's why the drop is happening. It's just that activity is gone. But it's, you know, if you're assuming that investment is paid out over time, then you would smooth that out. And we can, you know, we've shown various versions of that as well. So that could be something we could show also.
Great. Thanks for that. Let's go to Bill Street, then Jenny.
Thanks. So the challenge I see is the best technical document in the world, if it's politically naive, will simply collect a lot of dust. And you couldn't pay me enough money to go to Malala and start out a presentation that says the county needs to hire more staff, nor could you pay me enough to go to Milwaukee and start a presentation that vulnerable populations aren't mentioned for the first time until page 62. So we need to change the tone, and I fear quite dramatically. In the early pages, we need to tell a Clackamas story that prepares the reader for the why. So for example, as I said earlier, I live now in an evacuation zone for forest fires. Never in my wildest dreams would I have ever thought, living in Clackamas County between Gladstone and Milwaukee, would I be in a forest fire evacuation zone. I went without power for 11 days 2 years ago. We've had more trees die in Oregon because of weather than in this year than in any year in the history of the record keeping. I think there's a Clackamas story to tell that in very human terms lays out the cost of inaction. And I don't think we've told that story well enough so that when the average reader who hasn't spent 11 meetings with this comes to the technical piece, they have some emotive foundation to latch onto it and say yes. And I think Clackamas County has those stories, easy to tell. You can tell them in terms of the amount of forest land there's in Clackamas County. You can tell them in the amount of agriculture this county has. You can tell them in hydrology and the rivers that we have. You can tell them in income disparity that the top 20% of wealthy households in Clackamas County control 48% of the income of Clackamas County. So I think there's stories to tell. I think they need to be told up front to frame and give buy-in for all the technical pieces that follow. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I love hearing that too about building story. And William, if you're going to give written comments, too, the suggested stories too are most welcome, to let us know that you think help build that case. That would be great. Thank you. Jenny, thanks for waiting.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with Bill, and I'm going to attack this from kind of another angle. So this is a climate action plan, right? We're here because we want action. And in any action plan for any organization, you have to have targets so you know where you're driving to, and then you have steps for how to get to those targets. And those targets need to be quantitative. They can be adjusted or changed. They don't have to be 100% accurate in a particular moment, but you need to have them. And you need to have the steps for how to get there. And those steps and those targets cannot be influenced by feasibility. That is another layer. So I think that's what you are trying to do when you set out at the beginning. This is a strategic plan as opposed to a feasibility plan. I think it's really important. You need that backbone initially. Those steps for how to reach those targets, that's the hard part, right? Because nobody wants to take the hit there. And what is considered feasible today is not going to be feasible next week if we have a forest fire that endangers dense population areas. Again, suddenly what was considered not feasible today becomes hair on fire very feasible tomorrow. So feasibility is a constantly changing thing. And also what is feasible will depend on the composition of the commission itself. The plan, I would suggest, is going to long outlive the commission, and the commissioners will come and go. And so I think it's really important to have that framework, quantitative targets, steps, how to get there. Now, in terms of the feasibility, we can look at feasibility today and ask what is feasible today, and then we can pick out low-hanging fruits and things like that, and highlight actions and low-hanging fruit that we think the commissioners will go for. But I don't want that to compromise the targets and the steps for how to get there. So I think kind of separating out those two pieces. In terms of what Bill was talking about, the compelling story, that's right. And that has to do with what is feasible. And what is perceived as being feasible. And as I said, what is feasible now is different than 10 years ago when no one even considered they would be at risk for having to evacuate for a fire or breathe smoke for a month. So I want to make sure that our targets and our steps are not compromised by feasibility arguments. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Jenny. Who would like to go next? And if not, we'll go on to the next question. So I just want to give a moment for anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak in this round about what gives you pause. Now's a great time for you to raise your hand so that you can jump into the conversation. Some of you put some stuff in the chat too. That's also fine if you'd like to do that as well. Appreciate that too. We collect all of your comments too. So if you put it in the chat, we'll get it that way too. And Kim says, somewhere in the plan, you need to let the reader know that the implementation plan or actions are in a separate document. We have mentioned that a couple times, but we can make that more obvious. And it'll also be more obvious when this goes to design, as well. So some things are boxes. You'll have noticed in the plan itself, it says start box, end box, and those are going to be special call out boxes, too, that are distinct within the document as well. So we're happy to take feedback too, if you think anything else should be a box or if a box is missing too. Thanks for coming, Edgar. Appreciate it. Thanks for your feedback. Dave, we'll go to Dave or is anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak yet on pause? Want to speak? Okay, we'll go to Bill and then we'll go to Dave.
Excuse me, just on the very beginning of the document, you talk about the membership groups, and I noticed, I think it's great, you've got a whole cast of young youth members that are involved, but I don't see any other membership from the business community. I think that came up in one of our earlier meetings, that there was going to be outreach to chambers and other businesses or business associations. And I think that would be helpful, having that in this document, at least if people are looking at it and say, yeah, we ran this by the business community. But maybe I'm missing something here, but I didn't see it in the very first draft here, or page 5, I think is where I was looking at. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Bill. Dave, thanks for waiting.
Yep, you bet. Just on the third thing here regarding explanatory standpoint, what I would suggest, just to make sure, go through, make sure each graph, these are kind of simple things, just to make sure they're properly titled, axes are properly labeled, graphs that are to the average reader that may be a little bit esoteric or convoluted, just provide some bullet points so that, you can arrow to certain lines or curves or whatnot to help the reader understand what's going on in that graph. And then there's a couple of tables where the tables appear to be extracted from other references, and the tables themselves are rather complicated, and the numbers are meaningless. And so they should have some explanation behind those numbers so that you can understand, well, what type of probability you're talking about, for example, what is a vulnerability score, because you need to provide it their context. Otherwise, there's really no point, in my opinion, of having that table in there for somebody that's just going to read through this document. So those are my general comments there.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, just in case anyone else has to leave a little bit early, Ellen has put the link to the survey with these questions in them for you to members of the CATF to continue to give us feedback as well. So make sure you grab that if you do have to leave before we go. We will also email it, of course, to everyone too. But if you want to get it right away, you can. It's right there. It's live. Okay, thanks very much, Dave. Bill, let's go back to you. And then, yeah, we can move into, from a definition or explanatory standpoint, what else is needed to help explain things to the reader. So thanks very much for that, Dave. It's very helpful. Bill. Or William, which would you prefer to be called?
I was going with William just because we had a bill.
Right, okay.
So when we think about the reader, I think we have one reader is the county staff. One set of readers are the County Board of Commissioners. Another set of readers are us crazies who are totally immersed in this. And then the last set of readers, and perhaps the most important, is the general public. And my sense is, from the document as it currently stands, and I realize there's a very fine line between scaring people into action and scaring people into inaction. But I don't get a sense of urgency. I don't get an explanation of what happens if we don't act. And the IPCC 6, most of it is out. The really scary part's been leaked and should be out shortly if it's not out already. I think it's due out in a week or two. And something there that helps the general audience understand this really is a crisis. And when you get yourself buried in the technical aspects of the report, you can lose track of that. And we really need something for the reader, the citizen reader, to keep them engaged and have them, to those that are willing to take on the struggle, have it be as accessible as possible. And I don't think we're quite there yet. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Valerie, let's go to you next.
First, really quick, I just want to speak to what William said, because like in the one we're working on in our city, they pointed out that 4 degrees temperature increase would mean we will have a climate here like Southern California. And that really hit me hard when I read that. So I have a few just little things. I think another thing, with the public reading this, we all know what these terms mean, but I think there could be definitions. I'll read them off really fast. On page 12, the term direct air capture and storage technology, and just overall carbon sequestration. And then on page 38, net zero standards for buildings. I think all those could use definitions, so we know what they mean, but I don't know that the general public will, and we want them to understand this as they read it. And then I have a few little things that I think could be corrected. On page 26, or well, actually on page 59, you talk about since 1901, the temperature's gone up 2.2 degrees. That's Celsius. So maybe you want to put Fahrenheit in there too, or define that it's Celsius. It just says 2.2 degrees, but on page 26, you do say 2.2 degrees Celsius and 4 degrees Fahrenheit. So just for clarity. And then on page 25, and this might be my personal thing, but it says Clackamas County located in North Central Oregon. And I know Clackamas County is about 1/3 of the way into our state, but I don't think most of us identify with it as Central Oregon. So it's just a little term that I think doesn't ring true to me with where we feel our county's located. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. Jenny.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. All those details are really helpful. I agree. I don't consider myself a resident of Central Oregon. And that's really important to the story. Just in terms of clarification, one thing I think that could simplify the document, I felt like first of all, it can be tremendously simplified. I think there's too much of a mix of the data with the narrative. And I think they should be separated out, maybe a page or whatever under the case for, and then Bill's compelling stories, and just separate out all of the components so the reader doesn't get lost in what the point is. And then like a section on targets and make it really clear, and steps and make it really clear, and just separating everything out. And then if you have narrative, vulnerable populations as like a sub thing under steps, it's just all mixed up right now. And I find it very hard to read, and it's too easy to lose track of the point of it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Jenny. Anyone else want to talk to missing what's missing from a definition or explanatory standpoint to help the document for the reader? Anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet, and we're getting your comments too in the chat too as well. Writing climate action plans always reminds me of the famous quote, and I'm forgetting who originally said it, but it's basically in a letter saying to a friend in this probably 100 or so years ago, "I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a shorter letter." Certainly anyone who's done concision, right, takes time, sort of to get all of that down. So comments on related to that or simplification and shortening are appreciated. What would you like to see more emphasis on that's already in the report, or can we remove anything if there is anything? Like, do you think that, over explains something, for example? Who would like to speak to that? Julia.
Yeah, I feel like it is very positive and hopeful. Someone said earlier, and that it's achievable. And I feel like we buried the lead a little bit by not starting out of the gate that Clackamas County has this climate neutral goal. This is why we have a CAP. I didn't see them mentioning that goal until quite a ways down. So yeah, I just feel like it's been touched on already, but we can really talk up all that positive aspect to get just incitement and engagement around it. And also the youth task force. I don't think I see a representative here today to bring their comments in on it. But yeah, I think their involvement needs to be highlighted more.
Wonderful, thank you. William.
Yeah, there is a graphic on equality, equity, and it's mentioned, as I said, on page 62 and a little bit on page 63. But I don't think that gives it the gravitas that it needs. This can be done in a way where existing inequities are magnified, or it can be done in a way that existing inequities are mitigated. And we need to decide if we want to bite into that apple at all. I, of course, would argue we do, but I'm probably not the majority on that. But even if we don't, I do think we need a little more heft to the vulnerable population piece. And following up on what was said about if temperature rises and we end up with the weather of California, that is going to mean folks living next to the river, some who are very rich, some who are very poor, are going to flood more. I mean, there's just a whole host of, once again, stories and changes that are going to happen to the land use as a result of the weather change that we're going to need to address. The county owns forest land, and we're still planting trees as if the weather's not going to change. And that makes no sense. And we have huge swaths of industrial timberland, and they're still planting trees as if the weather's not going to change. And the only thing we know for certain is the weather's going to change. So that means figuring out those rural vulnerable populations, not only to wildfire, but to economic change, either growth or collapse. Thanks.
Thank you. Valerie.
One thing I noticed that, I gotta say, it twice, there's just like a statement twice in this document, once on page 30 of employee sequestration can contribute to carbon neutrality by 2050, but it in no place do I see where it really explains how that could be done. I know we're not going into specifics necessarily, but there could be examples of things that can be done to help flesh that out. And then the other last thing was in examples of additional co-benefits, it gives an example where energy efficiency incentives after retrofits could disproportionately make low-income homeowners or households, I should say, take on the bigger burden of the energy utilities. And I would really like to see that kind of have more detail, like it be extended to show what other things could be done to help those low-income people and make this more equitable as part of this example, such as subsidies, or I don't know what they would be, but something to show where there's a way to make that more equitable when we have these co-benefits.
Great, thank you. And there are some examples on page 49, just to draw your attention to, a couple of boat sequestration. And sort of also linking out to the report, the done by the Global Warming Commission, as well, but we can certainly look to emphasize a bit more on the how. Thank you for that, Valerie. Okay, and so we've got time for a couple more folks. So we don't have a lot of time, so I just ask that you be brief and brilliant, knowing too that you still have time to fill out the survey, lots of time to still provide us with feedback. We want to make sure we get to public comment today as well. So let's go to Adam and then we'll go to Dave.
William touched on what I was going to mention, but I think a strong tie into the rural community. There are a lot of people that feel left out just by what we're talking about. So that doesn't really, it's not captured in this, what benefits and the economic impact for those people that are left out of this conversation in general.
Okay. Thanks very much, Adam. Appreciate that comment. And Dave, we'll round it with you and then we'll go to public comment. So thanks everyone who's been waiting in the public and for attending today. We'll come to you next.
Just briefly, I think what would help, unless I missed it, to have our two largest utilities have something in this report that says, yes, we've looked at this, and yes, these reductions are feasible. I mean, that because we're really talking a relatively short time frame, and they usually plan, a decade or more in advance. And so I think it would help the reader to say, oh, this isn't a pipe dream. I mean, maybe it is, but if it's not, it should be clearly stated so that they make folks feel better, or where the weak links are, that those are identified.
Yeah, definitely. Like this isn't a pipe dream, done this enough times to see that, but it's not an easy thing to do either. Right. This is going to be a big challenge, and so, yeah, finding the balance, too, between talking about, of course, the imperatives for climate change, telling the compelling narrative, certainly that's what I've been hearing a lot of from everyone here on the team, or several people here on the team, is of course really important too. How do you not make it too long? How do you explain enough, essentially to people, as well? There's all sorts of considerations that need to go in and choices that need to be made, too, for this. But I think the more important, and I guess what I feel obligated to also say, is that this is hard and it needed to start yesterday, kind of thing too. And there's no perfect set of conditions under which to fully always explain, do you know what I mean, sort of everything. I think that we definitely want to make sure though that people understand, exactly what's going on, and we make a compelling case, essentially for action. But the climate is changing, and so action is really necessary as soon as possible, as well. And that this is just a starting point, as we mentioned, sort of in the journey, and that getting underway will also teach you more things than a planning process, like what, can, as well. It just really sets you up to get on that journey, essentially. And so we want to make sure that we do a good enough job to make the case for that journey to start, rather than for anything to delay sort of any further too. So the comments that you've all provided though to us today, and I look forward to further comments from you, are really helping essentially with that journey. I wanted to give you a sense of what my lens, too, is like in terms of practically making it, making this too across the finish line. Nana, if it's quick, I can come to you, but I got to make sure we do public comment as well. So we'll wrap up with you.
It's very quick. I just wanted to know, A, do we submit our comments to you and Ellen? B, it seems to me that if you guys are bringing to the county in March and we have another meeting to get through about implementation steps, that it would be very difficult to have those two meetings, have meaningful time for feedback, incorporate this in the plan, and still bring it to the county by March. Can you work with me on that?
I can't talk about extending timelines in a meeting like this, if that's what the thrust of your comment is. But yeah, we'll be talking about implementation at the next CATF meeting in February as well. And so currently the plan is slated to go to the board in March, as I sort of mentioned. And yes, Ellen's going to put the link to the survey to provide your feedback in the chat, or if you want to just directly send it to us via email under the 4 questions that we have, we'll take it that way as well. Great, thanks, Nina. Ellen, so time for public comment, and we can go to the next slide, Chris.
Yes, if anyone would like to, who's in the audience, would like to say a few words, please raise your hand. And I see one person, Lynn, has done that. Elizabeth, we have about, I believe, about 5 minutes or so for public comment. So we'd ask that you keep your comments fairly brief. I know that's tough on this subject, but we will also have a major public comment period coming up when you'll have lots of opportunities to give your input. So I will go first to Lynn, and I will allow you to talk. And I think you should be able to talk. Welcome, Lynn.
Hopefully. Am I here?
Yep.
Okay.
You're here.
So a few things, and I will definitely keep it short. First of all, thanks for all this hard work. I really appreciate it. I've been trying to get the city of Happy Valley for years to do something, and they're like, oh, I think Clackamas is doing something, so we don't care. So thank you guys very much. And a few things. First of all, I'm not going to get into all the ins and outs, but I have real concerns about relying in any significant way on renewable, quote unquote, natural gas, renewable methane. It is strongly promoted by Northwest natural gas, i.e. Northwest methane. It's polluting, it's climate killing. it's awful. And I understand there, whatever, there's a lot of ins and outs. I won't get into all the details, but it's a real concern. Yes, this is going to be hard. And I know some of you have said this in some ways or another, but you know, the impact of not doing all of the things is basically telling all of our children we don't care. And that just seems like not a good option. And I don't know how you make that more strongly clear without also offending people. I mean, I understand that's a tricky dance. I think it does need to be a little bit clearer, like the real need and the need that people are feeling everywhere, like the farmers. I mean, you know, they understand. Another thing was, last thing is, you talked about we can't impact individual choices, but there are things that can be done. I mean, I understand that it's not popular everywhere, but it's becoming more accepted. The banning the sale of methane appliances in new construction, you know, that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not saying take everybody's gas stoves away right now, but, you know, banning the future stuff and phasing all that out, it's not only harming climate, but it's also incredibly unhealthy, as, you know, most folks know now, to have especially stoves and whatnot inside people's homes. So those are just 3 things. There's so many more, but I'm not going to take everybody else's time. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Thanks.
Thank you,
so
Lynn.
much.
Can I clarify one thing, Ellen, or should I wait till the end?
No, go ahead.
Just to say, my apologies. I didn't mean the takeaway to be we can't impact individual actions. What I mean is the scope of the project is not to suggest actions that would regulate individual actions. You know what I mean? Like down to that degree. So, but yes, like great point, you know, as well. They can and will need to be impacted. That's just part of longer discussions and more specifics.
Thanks, Naomi. Elizabeth, you have your hand raised, so you should be able to, we should be able to hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
This is Elizabeth Gracer Lindsay. It was good to see this detailed report about the steps and also the supportive modeling to cut carbon emissions. And there was a section in your presentation where you talked about climate impacts. I think it listed temperature, precipitation, and wildfires. And I think you should include there the impacts on forest land and agricultural land in practice. We have been seeing in the press about a fur-ageddon, which means that a lot of trees have been lost in Oregon, a million acres, and some of that is in Clackamas County. So forestry is being really impacted by climate change, and the same with agriculture. People who have pasture for their livestock are seeing the pasture season shorten as it gets hotter and drier, which is a large expense for people raising livestock. We see that crops are being killed, such as the heat wave killed a lot of fruit crops, and it also killed some livestock. So I think that would help bring the impacts of climate change close to home if you mention those things. And you also mentioned the desirability to lessen driving. And I think the way the county could work on that with really no cost is to have transportation and land use planning more well integrated and including climate as one of the factors that's done in that planning. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. That appears to be everybody who had their hand raised.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone attending, you know, today's meeting as well. We appreciate that. And for your comments. Let's go to next steps. All right, so we'd love for you to fill out the online feedback survey. And so Ellen will put that back into the chat sort of momentarily. We'll email it to you as well. The public feedback period will also be, so for members of the public too, the draft cap will be online, and you'll be able to provide feedback from February 1st to March 1st. Not to put too much on you at the same time, Ellen, but where's the best way, or how will people find out where they can get a copy of the draft so that they can provide feedback?
sorry, was looking at some comments. The draft report is on the website, on our project page. Everybody here should have received, all the members of the task force should have received a copy of it. But it's also online on the web page, and I will put that link in the chat also.
Okay, wonderful. And then I've made a typo there. The final CATF meeting will be in February, not March. I was thinking, I think of the final adoption currently, so it's sort of slated for the plan. So we will meet again. We will talk about implementation at that meeting. And in the meantime, we'll be working on incorporating feedback as we receive it from you as well. So I just, again, really want to thank everyone for your attendance today, for your thoughtful feedback, for your very thoughtful and dedicated participation in this process, as well. We can't create a great plan without your help, without your feedback. So again, my thanks to you on behalf of SSG. And Ellen, did you have any final comments on behalf of the county?
I would just like to say, as somebody who is involved in writing reports for years, and as somebody who cares deeply about this topic, I really appreciate your input. It is so helpful to have people like you who care about this topic and who have the expertise to look at it and to also say, hey, we can understand that, but other people may not be able to. And if you want to get the message across, consider such and such. So this has been really, really helpful today. And I very much appreciate it. And I see Dr. Sarah present is there waiting. She has something quick that she needs to say. So Sarah, could you go ahead and make a quick announcement, please?
Yeah, thank you so much. Ellen and Naomi gave me a couple moments to put in a plug for some opportunities with the Public Health Department. I really, really appreciate all of you serving on the Climate Action Task Force. And I wanted to let you know that the Clackamas County Public Health Advisory Council is open for 4 new positions, and there's recruitment for those positions closing on February 15th. We're looking for people representing business, education, the general community, and healthcare. So if you're interested in maintaining activity with the county and want to influence public health in Clackamas County, then please consider applying. And I'm going to put the website in the chat, and thank you for giving me that moment.
So if you enjoyed this, you'll also really enjoy working with Dr. Present as well too. So it'd be a fantastic opportunity to continue to participate in public engagement on these important topics. Again, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you again next month. And there we go. For anyone still here, there's the link Dr. Present has put in the chat as well, if you're interested in that opportunity.
We'll be sending out scheduling info for February soon.
We will, yeah.
Thank you. Sooner the better.
Will we have a week to review the implementation phase of the draft?
Yep. We'll send it out a week.
It really helps, if we have that much time to kind of get through it.
Oh,
yeah, we will give you time, and I can say a little bit more about timeline than Naomi can. We do want to get this right rather than quick. You've probably noticed that already because we're still working on it. It could be that we might not go to the board with this until April because we want to have it the way it needs to be before it goes to them. So we're not going to keep bringing you to more meetings, but we are going to take the time to really absorb your input and do what we need to do with it, and also the input that we get from the public. And during the public comment period input, which will be all of February, you are welcome to keep sending in ideas that you have. And we know that we'll especially note those ideas because you have extra expertise on this. So we're not going to rush this if we're not ready to go to the board in March. Naomi may come down here and we'll just keep her here for a month till we're ready to go to the board. So just wanted you to know that. And thank you again so much. This is so valuable to us. I think we're done.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye all.